Hey there, champions. You'll notice that this is a much older slide deck because it doesn't take up the full screen, but we're just going to roll with it. I am here to give you your paper 3 reminders. I'm really regretting not having one of the HOA teachers do this, or at least co-pilot this with me, but we're going to do the best we can. So just some reminders for paper 3. Paper 3 for you guys is going to be the second day of the exam. So HL and SL are both sitting for paper 1 and paper 2 on the same afternoon. And then you guys are going to have your paper 3 for HL students the next day in the morning. You are going to be writing 3 essays. There are 18 possible subcategories with 2 questions each for a total of 36 questions. You can pick any of those 3 to write. So unlike paper 2, where you have to write 1 from one category and 1 from the other category, there is no limit for that here. I'm seeing now that I've used a very old version of paper 3. It is no longer worth 20 marks. It is 15 marks apiece for a total of 45 marks. Once you look at all of the questions and cross out the stuff you don't know and cross out the stuff about Canada and Mexico that you don't know, you're going to be left with about a dozen questions that are possible. You're going to want to look at those and find the 3 best ones that you can write. And remember, you don't have to write them in order. So if you're looking at section 17 and think that's going to be your strongest, you can write a question from that first and then move through in order of question difficulty for you as opposed to question number. You're going to have 2 hours and 30 minutes for this. I suggest you dedicate some time to pre-writing. We want to pre-write in the answer booklet and then cross that out and then start writing our essay. We want each of our essays to have an introduction, 3 strong body paragraphs, and a conclusion. And if we can save ourselves time at the end to double check, that would be incredibly helpful. I know I've said it all year long, but you want to review your presidential doctrines. You want to review foreign versus domestic policies. And remember that we want to double up on our paper 1 and 2 information. So going deep on Cuba or looking at Cold War material or civil rights material will definitely help us. So my suggestions are go back and review Great Depression, FDR, New Deal. If you are interested in the Second War in the Americas category, that could be something that you want to review. Political developments in the Americas after Second World War is code for where you're going to potentially see Castro. Civil rights movement and social movements overlaps with paper 1. Cold War overlaps with paper 2. Maybe you're a kid that's really into Hamilton and independence movements are your thing. Maybe you're a Civil War reenactor and the Civil War is really your thing. But I think the highlighted areas are going to be the best bet for most of us. In terms of presidents to review, my top picks would be FDR, LBJ. That dichotomy between Great Society and Vietnam is definitely something you want to re-examine. And then in terms of that third president, I'm leaning towards Ike this year. Some of you may want to review JFK. Some of you may want to look at Truman. Some of you may want to look at Reagan. But you should go into the test being comfortable with 3 presidents. Miller Center has a great website where you can go in and get a quick overview of, or a deep dive of each president, but I highly recommend you review their foreign and domestic policies. I do have some of that material embedded in our resources, so you can go back and find that. Here's just a little sample. Writing the paper 3 is just like writing the paper 2, is just like writing those AP essays, is just like writing those Regents essays. It's going to have an introduction with a strong thesis. You're going to have 3 body paragraphs and then a conclusion. You don't have any documents for these essays, so you have to bring all the material to the table. You have to have the vocabulary. You have to have the names and dates. You have to have the historiography. Again, that technique that we practice of doing the pre-writing and then starting our essay would be very helpful here. You don't want to write outside the borders because that's not going to get scanned into the computer. We're looking at an ice cream sundae in which the structure of the essay is our beautiful glass. And then we fill that glass with all of our information, our knowledge, our historical context, our examples. Then we analyze those examples, then we bring in different perspectives, and that would be helpful with historiography. You want to have a strong thesis that doesn't just echo the question or agree with one side of the question. You want to set up a sort of claim, counterclaim synthesis situation. Answer the Q opposing view, justify the two. Some of these prompts will be helpful to answer compare contrast style. Some of them are going to be to what extent questions. Some of them are going to be evaluate. Some of them are going to be discuss, and we have to prepare for all of those. So I would take a look at your IB command terms and make sure you understand what you're being asked when they pose those questions. I do have the mark bands here laid out interestingly with approach to the question, knowledge, and analysis. If you're interested in how you're going to be scored, I find this very helpful. Did not create it, got it from another teacher. Super helpful. We have the version that we've been using in class. You remember this from your MAU essays, how you tally up your points and then you find your place on the mark band. You want to make sure you review your historiography, and not just your historiography in the context of the Cold War, how we learned it in 12th grade. You want to go back and you want to review the historiography for the areas that you feel most comfortable. Maybe you're looking at the traditional interpretations or the progressive era or the consensus historians or our new left and social historians, but you want to make sure that you have a handle on that. Don't get overwhelmed by the amount of selection that you have in paper 3. It's basically going to be about picking what's best for you. So you want to avoid the sections that you have no interest in. For example, if you're not interested in the independence movements, then just skip it. But those Hamilton kids, go for it. It might not always apply to the prior knowledge that you have. So you may not have studied Bolivar or San Martin since 10th grade. That would not be a question you want to pick. But you might find that the Civil War question is very similar to a project that you did in 11th grade on something like Reconstruction, and that would be helpful. I've given you previous questions or review questions if you want to review independence movements, the Civil War. Don't pick the Mexican Revolution question unless you are really well versed in the Mexican Revolution. That's just a warning. I think the Great Depression questions are going to be your bread and butter. Do I think there's a possibility that you can answer both of these? Probably not. But if you did one of those deep dive units into, say, the Depression in Argentina, there is a possibility. Sometimes you'll find that the Second World War questions are incredibly helpful and sometimes not. You may find political development in Latin America to be a helpful section. Here is the two populist leader question. Yes, Castro is a populist leader, but who else would you use? If you studied Perón, that might be helpful. And notice that section 15 is political developments in the United States and Canada. So that part's tricky, but if they give you information that you can answer, say Kennedy's New Frontier, then by all means. Here's some practice Great Depression questions, Second World War questions, political developments in the Americas after World War II. You want to go back and look at Castro and Cuba. Oh, this is an old PowerPoint because it says the Castros are still alive. Well, several, but not Fidel. Here are some section 14 political developments in the America questions that were most recently asked. You might want to look at those, check out how the questions are being asked and what additional information you would need to answer them. Here's a reminder of your Castro and Cuba material that you already have. It's in your unit organizers. Here's your HOA connections. Sections 16 and 17 are where I would be looking first when I opened up the packet. Cold War in the Americas, you should definitely know at least one of those questions. And then civil rights and social movements in Americas, you should definitely know one of those questions. There's a possibility you could answer a question for the Americas 1980 to 2005. Sometimes those questions are possible for what you know, and sometimes they're not. So I wouldn't bank on it. I would probably write one of the questions from section 16 or section 17 first, and then work my way through the ones I'm not as comfortable with. So here are some reminders about Cold War in the Americas. Previous Cold War in the Americas questions that have been asked. Notice it goes 45 to 81. I'd pay attention to that date. Examples of other previous questions that have been asked or to prepare for. Some reminders on your Cold War historiography. Again, know those 3 presidents that you pick backwards and forwards. Civil rights review. Previous civil rights questions to study. Additional civil rights information from our paper 1. Civil rights timelines. More civil rights timelines. The difference between our civil rights unit for paper 1 versus civil rights in paper 3. This is what it's going to look like when you open it up. And it is okay if that first page, you're like, I don't know these questions or I can't answer these questions. You want to flip through and find the questions that you can answer. And sometimes those questions are going to be on the 3rd and 4th page. Don't forget to flip to the back of the packet because that's where your bread and butter is.